It's two guys and a mic. Jim Ryan and Mark Rizzo. I don't know what episode we're up to. I'm not keeping track. They're just the positive vibes are flowing in. I've got pages of comments. Pages.
So do I. Plus, I'm getting all kinds of friend requests, marriage proposals.
People you don't know.
Everywhere. Yeah, everybody wants a piece of this fine podcast.
So is this podcast on video too?
Oh, yeah. It's on YouTube.
It's being blasted around the world.
Okay.
I think I told you that. Didn't you get a makeup person? Mark, I thought you were in charge of getting Steve Leeds, the makeup person, today.
Shit,
Hair and makeup.
Damn, I would have put a suit on.
Well, we're not that formal. That voice you're hearing, by the way, is the one and only Mr. Steve Leeds, ladies and gentlemen. Longtime record label, all around good guy, worked at MTV, knows more artists than Mark and I combined. Mr. Leeds, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here as long as you don't refer to me as Mr. Leeds. So
we can call you Beeb Leeds, right?
you can call me, no, you can't call me Al. You can call me Steve.
Okay, we'll call you Steve. Steve and I worked together for about 20 years at Sirius XM.
Did we work together or did we survive?
We survived.
Okay.
But sometimes we worked together. We collaborated on some really cool things. We did the Phil Collins Up Close and Personal in the Fishbowl, bunch of things.
Yeah, we had a good time.
Yeah, we did. And why don't you give everybody a quick rundown of basically your start in the music business up until you got to Sirius XM?
How long is this recording for?
Well, there's no time limit here. We go as long as we want.
We can go on and on and on.
I should have brought my business card collection. Well, I started in college radio at American University. When back in the day when there was a teletype and I did the news because my roommate was getting busy and I couldn't stay in the room. So I went to the campus radio station. All right, so I got the bug there. I worked there at the campus radio station, clawed my way up the ladder, became station manager and all that stuff. And I worked part-time on weekends at the Voice of America, producing foreign language broadcasts for overseas. Back then, even then, I was a troublemaker because I was supposed to use their library, and instead I brought in like Volunteers of America by this airplane and things like that. But they'd rather have me play some instrumental. And then I got a job working part-time during the week for a famous New York disc jockey who was working at an AC station down there named Murray the K.
Oh, yeah.
So I worked for Murray. And when I graduated, I used to schlep up to New York because then he was on NBC. They had a network thing called NBC Monitor. Anyway, so while Murray was there, he brokered time eventually on an FM station, WHFS, and I became his producer. And when he left, they had me doing a shift, so I would do overnights. I was doing, I think, midnight to 6. It's a free-form progressive rock station. When it was really free-form, you could play and do anything.
That's in Annapolis, right?
Well, now it is. Back then, it was in Bethesda, Maryland.
Okay.
So we used to do crazy stuff like I was instructed to do this. If somebody called up and requested a song that was not in sync with what you were doing, you were required to play a cart machine there. And you put the cart machine on audition channel and held the phone, it's really high tech, hold the phone up to the cue speaker in the board and play the cart. What did the cart say? The cart said, due to the inferior nature of the music you have requested, the WHFS reject-o-matic rejects you. And I was instructed to hang the phone up.
That's great.
And the other thing was, back then it was mono or stereo. And because I was running the transmitter then also, you had the control over that. So you used to like get all the stoners at the middle of the night go, hey, that little red dot on your receiver, I'm going to make it go off. Watch this. And you turn the stereo generator off and people go, oh, what did you do? Anyway, that was fun. I worked at WHFS for a while, making probably around $60 some odd a week. And it was terrible. I went to my faculty advisor. I said, "What do I do? I graduated college." And he goes, "No, you want to go to grad school." I go, "You got to be kidding." Anyway, he convinced me to apply grad school, Syracuse University Newhouse School of Communication, and I got accepted there. I was on the waiting list because I applied so late. Anyway, they got accepted, and I told the station I was leaving, and they were not happy with me. They said, "Oh, stay here. We're going to make you a star." Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so I went up to Syracuse and worked on my master's degree up there. I worked part-time there, weekends at WOUR in Utica, New York. I did late night, I guess Sunday. I was the Sunday morning transmitter engineer and ran the God Squad tapes at the top 40 station WOLF. And during the summer, they let the grad students run the campus radio station. It was a big FM signal in central New York, and WAER. I was a program director there. Anyway, I graduated, went back to New York, worked for Murray the K at WNBC. That was when Wolfman Jack was there. It was a good experience. And I got wind of the fact there was going to be a job opening at Atlantic Records. And I didn't know what to do, but I put on a suit one day and went to the Time Warner Communications building. And I'm going to take the elevator because I'm going to go up to HR and maybe get a job at Warner Cable. And in the elevator pops this promotion guy who was the head of college promotion at Atlantic. And he sees me in a suit and he starts laughing. He goes, "What are you doing?" The last time he saw me, I was wearing tie-dye shirt and smoking a fatty and all that. And he said, "No, get off here." Takes me to the second floor. I get this quick interview. And the next thing I know is I'm the New York promotion representative for Atlantic Records. And I was there for about 4.5 years, climbed up the corporate ladder, did the first time they had a regional album staff that did quote FM rock radio. I did that for a while. And then I left there and I started my own independent promotion company. So I decided, since I was the Northeast Regional from Maine to Virginia, I would carve out all the rock stations there and I would be a freelance person that people could hire if they needed help or they didn't have, like, if one of the first clients I got was Rounder Records. And Rounder put out folk and bluegrass records, but they hired this band from Delaware and they didn't know what to do with it, but they figured maybe we should try to get it played on the radio. So they hired a guy in San Francisco and they hired me, and it was George Thorogood.
Oh,
so
okay.
I started off then EMI put me on retainer. The office I was working at, it was the management office for Hall & Oates. So I was working Hall & Oates. I helped launch Stiff Records in the United States. I was working a record by John Cougar called "I Need a Lover."
Oh, yeah.
Everybody laughed at me. "Ah, come on, it wasn't taking you serious in promotion and working a record by a guy named John Cougar. Come on." Anyway, so it was fun. I had the Stray Cats, and I was great. And then the payola hearings came around, and that was the end of independent promotion. So I needed a job. What am I going to do? I got hired by MCA Records to be their head of East Coast A&R, which is artist and repertoire, which is signing new artists.
Yeah.
And one of the projects I worked as an indie was Joan Jett, her first record, Bad Reputation. And so I convinced them, let's sign Joan Jett. And we put out I signed Joan Jett, was one of the first things, and got in a lot of trouble.
Were you there for the whole "I Love Rock and Roll" thing?
Well, I orchestrated "I Love Rock and Roll." I mean,
Okay.
She was signed. What happened was, first record came out on her own label. I was an indie. Then she was signed to Boardwalk Records, which was Neil Bogart's label. And I was the head of promotion de facto because they really didn't have anything in the world of rock. And that was like a huge record. The first song off that album they released was somebody calling me. Sorry. She did a version of Little Drummer Boy. They decided to put that out as the first single, which I thought was not the smartest thing, but it was kind of a setup track. And of course, I love rock and roll.
Did you know that when you first heard that song, that should be the record for her?
No. we were still riding the crest of a bad reputation. I
Mm.
mean, listen, that record at the time where rock radio was still, there was a female musicians were not, there was a limitation. Well, we can't play more than 2 records by women. So there was other, Pat Benatar was out then, and who else? Ellen Shipley and Carla DeVito. There was a lot of female rockers, and it was anyway. It just rose. It eventually, um, it rose to the surface. But Boardwalk went bankrupt after Neil Bogart died, and so she was a free agent. So I brought her over to MCA, signed her there. So the album comes out, and I have this. I always want to be a troublemaker. The cassette had a bonus track on it, but it was hidden. You didn't know. It was her version of the Rolling Stones Starfucker. Well, some woman in Texas bought the cassette, put it in the car, and heard it,
Oh boy.
freaked out, and called MCA distribution, screaming, raving, and ranting. And they go, "What?" They call me. Go, how did this track? How did this? Yeah, well, it's a bone. Oh, Steve, you didn't tell us. No, I didn't.
Oh boy.
Then they put out a single from the album, and I was always fascinated by the technology. And on a 45, when you master a record, you can do something called a locked groove. So if you're on a manual turntable, you know what a turntable is, the automatic turntables reject at the end of the song. But if with a locked groove, a manual turntable, the locked groove keeps going. It's just the stylus doesn't stop.
Right.
So the last part of the song is just the guitar chord, wow, and it just keeps going, wow, wow. So the jukebox operators didn't know this. Kids figured it out, and they played the B-side of the single, and it wouldn't ever end. And of course, the complaints went to MCA distribution. Go, what's going on here? Anyway, so
Interesting. I found it interesting that you wore a suit and Mark wore a suit to their
And you
first
both got the
record label
jobs.
jobs, and you both got jobs. And he did it in the mail room, you did it in the promotion room. So
yeah,
interesting.
so very different times.
Yeah.
Um,
How'd you get to MTV?
What did I do then? Then I worked for a management company because I left MCA. That new regime came in. That was always fun. Steve, please tell the office that we're going to close the office in New York next week. What does that mean? You got to let everybody know that this is their last week. Oh, okay. So I was working with Olivia Newton-John's manager on a soundtrack, and I had to call him up and say, look, I won't be able to finish this project because he goes, that's a shame. A few minutes later, West Coast calls. Steve, you shouldn't tell people we're closing the office. Well, you just told me that. Well, things are changing, moving faster than we thought, so there'll be some new people coming in. And I could tell you lots of sordid tales about my tenure at MCA and all the craziness that went on there. There was a reason it was called Music Cemetery of America.
Never heard that one.
They had the guy that was running it was a finance guy, and he had this vision that you drop the list price on a record after so many times. So every year a record would drop. So if a record was released at $15.98, next year it's $14.98, then it's $13. Every year they drop. It was a wacky place. Anyway, I went to work with the management company, Lieber Krebs. At the time, they had Aerosmith, AC/DC, Def Leppard. And I was there for a while. And then I also helped out an entrepreneur, Mike Lembo. He had a label called Deli Platters. We put out a couple of 45s. I get a phone call from Business Affairs. That was then CBS Records, now Sony. Said, got a phone call from a guy in New Jersey, in Newark. He wants to start a music television service. He wants our videos. We're not giving them to him. I told him he'd need to have somebody that we trusted and knew in the business. Would you take a meeting with him? Now, you have to understand, this is the time MTV had just started. And because of then technology, there was not cable available in New York City, Bronx, Queens, Staten Island, and most of New Jersey. So this was a UHF station that broadcast on top of the Empire State Building and had a second signal out in Smithtown, Long Island. So it had amazing coverage of the metropolitan area on UHF frequency, channel 67 and channel 68. At the time, it was broadcasting movies, but you had to buy, or had to lease rather, a cable box to descramble it. So it was sent over the airwaves, but it had to be descrambler, and you had to have this thing. So it was, some sort of Wemetco home theater.
That's
Anyway, I
right.
schlep out to
WHT, I remember that. Yeah.
I schlep out to Newark, New Jersey, and meet the general manager, and he tells me that they want to scrap the movie format, and they think this MTV thing might be something, and they want to play music videos in competition before cable gets in. Okay. So I'd like to hire you. I'll make you a deal. I'll pay you $1,000 a week. And if something happens, I'll pay you for an extra 2 months. Okay. So when you want to go on the air, when this weekend? Yeah, okay. So you want to take me to the library? Yeah. So he takes me down the basement, and there's just all this steel gray shelving. It's all empty. I go, well, where's the videos? He goes, oh, that's what you got to do. Wait, you want to be in the air this weekend? Yeah. So I scramble around and take the job, and I get some videos, and I had to use their staff. So I had a bunch of kids that were really into it. Who's going to introduce the videos? How's that going to work? So they had a booth announcer who worked at the urban station in Newark.
Yeah.
A Southern guy from at WNJR was the station. His name was Steel Colony. Knew nothing about rock. I mean, he'd say, upcoming next is David Bowie. No, it's David Bowie. Anyway, so he would cut voiceover. I would have to script everything. I used to run around all day with a box of index cards and call the engineers, okay, play this, play that, play this. I bought from Radio Shack at the time. Radio Shack had a portable radio, battery operated, that got AM, FM, and TV audio. So I could listen in my car to the station's audio, so I'd always know what was going on. So that lasted for about a year and a half. A lot of fun screwing around with MTV because they had exclusives and you couldn't play their exclusives. So I picked up some syndicated shows that had this exclusive in them, and I couldn't help it. It was just there. Anyway, it's about a year and a half, and I worked from noon to midnight, and I reverse commute. I was living in the city. I was engaged. I was getting married. I go on my honeymoon. I got a phone call. Hey, Steve, we just played Jason and the Scorchers. The song's called Shop It Around. It's the last video we're playing. The station was sold to the Home Shopping Network. So I come back from my honeymoon unemployed.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but I didn't know was uptown by Columbia University, Lee Masters, Jarl Moan, was living with his sister, and he was programming VH1 for Bob Pittman, and he had been watching it. And he and I knew each other when he was a jock at WNBC. Anyway, he found out it was me. He offered me a consultancy. I need you to work with the MTV air staff. Because then he was moved over to run MTV and VH1. He goes, nobody has ever worked with the air staff. They've never been air checked or anything like that. So
no wonder. I could tell stories now.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Names will protect the innocent by not mentioning, but I brought one of the jocks into a room, put on the tape, and said, okay, turn the sound down. Let's look at your body language. And it was totally uncomfortable because no one had ever done that before. I hired a woman who was a talent expert with news people and brought her in and worked with the air staff. I brought in somebody who was an improv special and threw all the VJs and Kurt Loder in one room, and they had to learn how to get along. But that was a fun experience, you can imagine. So it was a lot of fun. Then I became staff, and then I had to go to the music meetings. Then I had to hire new VJs because Mark and Alan were leaving because they were in police academy and they thought they were going to have a Hollywood career. So I had to find a replacement for them. And then they decided, or I guess, or they didn't renew Martha Quinn's contract. Anyway, so
And Nina was gone by then, right?
yeah.
So who was your first VJ hire?
The first VJ I hired was Daisy Fuentes.
Oh,
They were launching MTV Latino, and they hired a casting person who brought in a whole bunch of Latin on-air hosts. And they found a guy they liked. And then somebody at VH1 gave me a VHS tape of the news girl at the Newark Spanish station. And that was Daisy. And I go, oh, this girl is hot. She's perfect. She's got big puffy hair. This will be perfect. They teamed her up with the guy. The guy burnt out and Daisy became the person. Only thing is with Daisy was she wasn't familiar with the music. And I got busted by the head of programming, called me in the office, said, who is that bimbo you have on in the middle of the night? She's terrible. Because part of the deal I made with Daisy is she could do Anglo TV as well as the Latin, if she agreed to do the Latin TV. And I said, well, well, cut her shift back. She's terrible. She's disconnected. She's not working. Anyway, we all know the story there. Then the other person I hired was downtown Julie Brown was there, but she had she had to leave for some sort of medical thing. And I go, what am I going to do? So there was a record, maybe some of your audience, maybe you guys remember, Homecoming Queen's Got a Gun.
yeah. I remember that
So
record.
Julie Brown. So I hired that Julie Brown, and she's a white girl, and downtown Julie Brown's an African American, not American, African British. And so just played it and like, hey, I'm Julie Brown. And people were like, what? So I brought her in and had her. Then I got a tape from when I worked at that management company, Lieber Krebs. They sent me a tape of a guy who did a countdown on Dutch TV, but he was an American, and he looked like what was his name? He looked like one of these teen pop stars. He had big blonde puffy hair, and I said, "Oh, this guy'd be good." He works at this radio station in Amsterdam. So I don't know. I got the nerve to call the station in Amsterdam, leave a message for the guy, not thinking anything would ever happen. Sure enough, he calls me back. He's an American kid, grew up in Virginia, loved to come back to the States. Adam Curry. So
Okay,
that's
that's where you're
attractive
going,
negotiation, was able to hire Adam.
Now, he still work for you and Z100 at the same time?
Yeah, Scott Shannon fell in love with him and put him on Z.
Yeah.
100. And that was what Adam's he loved doing top 40 radio. I mean, he was good at it too.
Yeah.
Adam was one of the first internet geeks ever. He told MTV he was going to create an online use MTV.com. And they went, yeah, go ahead. Well, 2 years later, they threatened to sue him and fire him if he didn't give it back.
Wow.
So he really was the pod father. He really got into podcasting in an early stage. And as you know, at Sirius XM, we had 2 podcasting channels.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, management decided not to keep them. And here we are years later, and now they have a whole podcasting services. So it's pretty funny in retrospect.
So go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off. No, I was going to say, how did you end up at Sirius XM?
So MTV moved me into the international division.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to help out launching MTV Brazil. I was sent to Japan with MTV Japan, and then MTV Europe. And so I would deal with all the international labels out of London. But they never told MTV Europe that there was a guy in New York. Anyway, so my position was eliminated. So I don't have a job. So I got a phone call from the concert promoter, John Scher, and John Scher said, you know, Polygram is starting another label. Anyway, long story short, I got hired at Polygram to be head of video promotion, and alternative radio. And I was there for a while, and then I got recruited by a small label that Doug Morris was starting called Rising Tide, which morphed into phone's gonna not stop ringing because of so I worked there at what became Universal, and then I got recruited to work at Virgin. They were starting they're moving their label from LA to New York, and to be their video and rock radio guy. And that was a mistake because I was working with a bunch of people who really didn't know what the hell they were doing. And they didn't appreciate the effort I put into their roster because the label was run by a producer, and he would go in the studio and concoct these bands and then say, "Here, Steve, get it on the radio," with no touring or any backing. Anyway, so it was an unpleasant parting of the ways. But while I was there was this satellite company, Sirius, starting, and there was a guy there. It was Joel Selkowitz, and there was a guy, Jocelyn Jocks, Kid Kelly, and he wouldn't leave me alone. He kept calling me, "You got to come, you got to come, you got to come see us. Let's have lunch." I'm like, okay. And I put together a pilot with Iggy Pop hosting an hour of Virgin Records, and I presented that. Nothing ever happened with that. But while I was there, I met one of their programming guys, and he said, "We can't get the record labels to understand what we're doing. We have these satellites up there while we're developing an audience, but they don't want to bring artists by. They don't want to service us. We really need some help with that."
It was bad when we were there first, Mark. When we started, you couldn't get anybody to come in.
I was like, well, all right. So I'm at Virgin, and then I get blown out. So I had been having lunch all the time with a neighbor of mine, Steve Blatter. He was living on 79th or 77th Street, I think, at Second Ave, and I was around the corner. Anyway, so I told him, so he goes, "Well, maybe we'll do something here." And he introduced me to Jay Clark, who at the time was overseeing all the programming. And they bring me in as a consultant. And how I pulled this off, I don't know. Because I was still under contract to EMI, and they were paying me, so I had them pay my wife the bulk of the money and paid me a token fee, so EMI wouldn't cut off my salary. So that was like 19 or so, 20 years ago. And that's how I got my foot in the door as a consultant.
Ah.
Then when, so there was a talent department, they wanted me to be there. And the woman who was running the talent department, and I'm spacing on her name now, it was just not working. And you could just tell she would go through Billboard magazine and circle the artists that were here and the ones that weren't here. And it was just a ragtag group of people who just had no focus or direction. It was just scrambling, trying to get things. So I made some phone calls and got some help going. And then when Mel Karmazin came in, they had a rule, no more consultants. So I said, "Steve, you're going to have to be on staff." But what they didn't tell me, it meant the woman that I had been working with was going to be let go, which I felt really awkward about, but it wasn't my decision. At the time, the other consultant, well, there was another consultant that I didn't know at the time, but was Ross Zapin. And the other consultant who had just been made president was Scott Greenstein.
Mhm.
And I go back with Scott when he was an attorney at Viacom. When I worked at MTV, I used to run into him. In fact, I was introduced to him by a fellow at a record store. He said, "You work at MTV?" He goes, "Yeah, there's a guy comes in here, Scott, all the time. Yeah, I should put you guys together." That's how I met Scott at a record store. And he always used to tell me, someday I'm going to run this place. And I go, Scott, you're a lawyer. You're not going to run MTV.
Hmm.
And we
He
stayed
just
in
ended up
touch.
running Sirius XM.
Yeah,
Not a bad gig.
he, he's a guy who doesn't really understand the word no. He's amazing. We're walking home one night from Viacom, and we walk by the Beacon Theater, and Meatloaf's playing. He goes, "Hey, you want to go see Meatloaf?" And I go, "Yeah, I guess. We don't have tickets." No, don't worry about it. Goes up, talks to the security guard at the front door, and next thing you know, he's doing.
Nice.
And then I take him to Giant Stadium at the time to see U2. And U2 has a meet and greet every night, but they don't go. It's like, you get chips and soda. I'm important. I'm at the meet and greet. That night, the band shows up. So I introduced Scott. Now, Scott's then just an attorney at Viacom. Time to go back to your seats. Go back to my seat. No, Scott. Show starts. No, Scott. Okay, now I'm at Giant Stadium out in Rutherford, and I drove Scott out there from the city. I don't know what to do. I go home. Next morning, I get to the office. I call his extension. Hey, man, what happened? Oh, you're not going to believe it. Bono invited me to sit on the side of the stage. But you just introduced him. Yeah, he said, yeah, come on, sit on the side of the stage. I go, okay, how'd you get home? Well, Bono took me home in his limo. We were doing shots in the car. I didn't get home till 3 a.m. My wife was furious. I go, well, you just met them. He goes, yeah. And that's when I knew that guy had some special magic that didn't understand no, and he could close. He could sell ice to the Eskimos, I swear.
Yeah.
And I respect, to this day, I respect that guy. Look, he got Howard. Howard was this close to signing to XM when there were two separate entities, and he snatched him away. So that's okay. I hope there's still time left on the podcast after all that talking, but yeah.
No, there's time left. Scott was an interesting guy to work with because I always described him as a very smart individual who wanted to get certain things done, great with ideas, but he didn't care how the sausage was made. He just wanted it made. And I think that's the way, at least that's what my perception was. And he's a very smart guy, extremely.
Scott's an attorney.
Yeah.
And he also went to school in London where he met his wife. He's a single child. He's a smart guy.
Yeah. Without doubt.
Competent and well compensated, certainly.
It's two guys and a mic. Steve Leeds is our special guest. Big, long resume of record label places, radio. We worked together at Sirius XM for a bunch of years. We do this top 5 segment every week, Steve. And the top 5 segment this week is favorite concerts you ever attended. So, Mark, why don't you start us off with your first one?
Well, as you know from previous podcasts, I've seen a lot of Billy Joel, and I think when you say Billy Joel, it has to be about, which Billy Joel show you've seen. And I think when he did the last play at Shea Stadium was pretty awesome. And I got to go to several of those where he brought up everybody from Tony Bennett to Paul McCartney. And I think that was a real special night and a great concert. And Shea Stadium was literally going up and down and rocking. And it was just a great night. I think they did a documentary about that. It showed how they
there's a DVD.
Right, how they had to get McCartney from Kennedy Airport in time. But that's one of the concerts you remember for a long time because that place was rocking. He owned Queens for the night, and it was fun. So
It's funny.
That was one of the best ones I've seen.
I have 2 Shea Stadium shows on my list. Steve, you have a
Mark,
favorite?
I'm surprised you didn't pick a Barry Manilow show.
Well,
Never
I didn't
mind.
give you my complete list yet, did I?
All right, never mind. One of my favorite concerts was at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and it was a very small audience, and it was Crosby, Stills, and Nash with Wynton Marsalis, and the Lincoln Center Jazz Ensemble. And they did most all of their hits in a jazz style. And it was pretty wild. And I will tell you, and I was straight and not on any drugs, but Stephen Stills was playing such an amazing guitar. I mean, I took my cousin's wife because she's a fanatic of him. I swear, Stephen Stills was like levitating. He was so, I was just so out there. Anyway, it was an amazing concert. And unfortunately, I guess due to financial restraints, it's never come out. But it's just an amazing. Imagine those Crosby, Stills, and Nash songs with those harmonies and the jazz players. It was a pretty amazing show.
How about you, Jim?
Well, my all-time favorite band is Genesis, and I've seen them a ton of times. But probably my favorite show ever, back in 2007, 2008, they were going to do this final, ended up not being the final tour, but they were going to do this tour. And Mark Goodman and myself, original VJ, because I was doing the 80s show, we went up to Toronto, Canada, and spent the day with them at the I guess it's called the Rogers Center, wherever the Maple Leafs play in Toronto. And we spent the day with them. And Mark had been friends with Phil. They'd been to each other's weddings. And so Mark, the coolest thing is Mark and I sat in the arena with the crew. And we got basically a run through of the entire show. And we were the only two in the arena. And then we spent the day with them. But it was at that event that Phil invited us to come to the Madison Square Garden show when they got to New York and sit side stage. And that was just a pretty special night to be that close to the band that I had loved for many, many years.
Well, I got to stick in my 2 cents. So when I was still working, I guess I was still at Atlantic, and the writer for the local New Jersey paper, The Record, was a Genesis nut.
Okay.
I'd never heard of them. And he said, you got to go see them. And he made me go up to Rockland Community College. They're playing College Date. And this is Peter Gabriel. This is like
early. This is early on.
Like, whoa. Did I realize later that they would be on Atlantic Records and I'd be working very closely with them. And when The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway album came out, the Steve Leeds famous promotion story that people love telling. So it was around Thanksgiving time. So I borrowed 2 sheep from the Nativity at Radio City, rented a shepherd's costume and a staff, and walked through Times Square with a placard that said Genesis Unfair, The Lamb. And we went up to then WXLO, went on the air with Walt Baby Love. And the sheep decided they didn't like it. So they went, bah, right when he had the open mic. It was pretty wild. And it was used as a trade ad of a angry cop looking at me with a bunch of sheep in the middle of Times Square.
Wow. That's pretty funny.
So I had to get the sheep back to Radio City from XLO, which was
they had a show to do.
42nd Street, so it's about what, 10 blocks maybe?
Yeah.
Well, back then they were checker cabs. So
right.
I flagged down a checker cab and pushed the lamb, 2 sheep into the back seat of the thing. So yeah, I mean, and the guys remember me, and it's
that's funny.
Yeah, that's just really nice, intelligent people, and so friggin' talented.
Oh,
and
yeah.
What bums me out is that they'll never get back with Peter Gabriel, because that was when the band was really out there.
You know, and the band didn't have a bad breakup. It was just one of these things. Peter wanted to be off by himself. You know, a lot of bands have really horrible breakups, and that band never did. And Phil, I mean, they searched for another singer. They just found nobody who could do it as well as he did. I mean, he reluctantly went out there, but
right. I guess the first album without Peter was Trick of the Tail.
Yes, right? Great album.
And what was it? The hit off that was Follow You, Follow Me. Right?
No, that was on, and then there were 3. Trick of the Tail didn't have a top 40 hit on it. but it had some good,
What was their first top 40 hit? Oh,
was Follow You, Follow Me. And that was and then there were 3 after Steve Hackett
That's
had
right.
left.
and that was a song that I was working, trying to get played. And there were 2 rock stations in New York, WPLJ and WNEW-FM. And WNEW-FM played the hell out of Genesis. PLJ did not. And they would not play Follow You, Follow Me. Program director was convinced it's not a hit. I'm not going to play it. I'm not going to play it. So what did obnoxious Steve Leeds do? I took them off the mailing list. They never got any Atlantic records. Their jocks didn't get it. WABC didn't get anything. And the music director called me up and said, "What are you doing? We didn't get the new Bubble Us thing." I said, "You don't play it anyway." It was just
Wow.
eventually they gave in and played it, but it was such a struggle to get that record played on that station.
And it was a big hit.
Yeah.
Their first US hit.
Yep.
Interesting.
And Phil's really debut.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Mark, what's your second one?
Well, again, I'm not as rock oriented as you guys, so I can't go into all of that. But I think anytime you see Springsteen in Jersey, and I've seen him many times, it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, made my list too.
When you have events like that, it's just, this guy's playing 4 hours. It's like going to church. It's amazing. So, I mean, I think you always have to include Springsteen.
Yeah, I saw the Born in the USA tour at Giant Stadium, and it was pretty special for him to, play there. Steve, what do you got next on your list?
All right, I'm going to be the old guy. So I'm going to go back to 1968.
Oh, okay.
Madison Square Garden, Blind Faith.
Wow.
And the opening act was free.
Free. Interesting. All right now. Nice.
Paul Rogers and free. And I think it was maybe one of the few Blind Faith dates that they did, because that band did not last very long.
No. I'll give you the next 2 for me because they were both at Shea Stadium. I saw the Rolling Stones with Living Color on the Steel Wheels tour, which at the time they said was going to be their last. Obviously, that didn't work out. Yeah, 1989, and they're still out on the road. And then Elton John and Billy Joel as a combo at Shea Stadium. That was a really good show too.
Right. I had that on my list too, because I was working with the Elton John folks, and they had me come out to Columbus, and I got to meet Elton that night. And while I'm talking to Elton, around the corner comes Billy Joel. And I'm like, and I had like 4 radio guys with me. Nobody took a picture. Everybody was like stunned. And Billy speaking to Elton about how he screwed the opening song up the night before, and he was apologizing. So Elton stops and introduces me to Billy, like I didn't know who Billy was. And that was quite an event, because if you remember the show, each one would play, like Billy would play Elton songs, Elton would play Billy songs, and then it was just a great night. And that was on my list as well, because you get two for the price of one.
Yeah. I got one more contemporary one to share, and it was just last year, actually. Because I'm not a big fan of stadium shows. I'm not as I've gotten older, I'm not as big a fan of stadium shows. But I took Kathleen to see Ed Sheeran at Ruth Eckerd Hall in Clearwater.
By me. Yep.
Florida, and it was the night before he was going to do his 2 big stadium shows for the weekend at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa. And it was because of his latest album, the album that he wrote about his friend Jamal, who had passed away very suddenly. And the songs didn't really lend themselves. I mean, he explained this. These songs just don't lend themselves to being played in a stadium setting. So that's why he was doing these smaller shows. He said, "Please bear with me. These shows aren't happy. These songs aren't happy, blah, 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 but I'm going to play them. They're therapeutic. And after that, we'll have fun and we'll do all the songs." And I was just sitting there praying, please, Ed, make sure you play Photograph. That's the one reason my wife is here, and agreed to come. And he did. So, but he's an amazing artist to see, either in a stadium or in a smaller setting. So
he's pretty cool. I saw him open for Taylor Swift on a stadium tour. That was pretty special.
Wow.
Do you have any more on your list, Steve?
Oh yeah. So last year I went to the opening of the Sphere to see you.
Yeah.
in Las Vegas. And I can only tell people that are listening or watching, if you have the opportunity, it might be a little pricey. The Sphere is an amazing experience. And I know
Wow.
that sounds like hype, but seeing you two there, and it's just, I say it's like those of you who ever been to a planetarium, it's like a planetarium on steroids, but
Wow.
so much so, and it's just an amazing experience. Las Vegas aside, it's an amazing experience. And you two, I mean, they were the ideal band to play there.
Yeah.
So that was an amazing, and I was fortunate enough to get tickets for opening night. So it was even more
Wow.
special.
Did that place, am I right? The place cost like $1 billion to create, something like that?
There was so many cost overruns and personnel changes and all, whatever. But when you go to a concert, and if you want to get up to get a soda or go to the bathroom, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. No, they have the rows broken down in the middle, so you only have to go halfway down, and there's another aisle.
Oh,
Nice.
nice.
It's really well thought out. There's security and people, hospitality people everywhere you go. It's just really well thought out, and it's just a real positive experience. The only difficulty is uh, you'd have to take a cab or walk there because there's no real parking. I mean, anyone who knows Vegas will understand that, but
How many people does it hold for a show?
I I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
We'd have to look it up.
Gotcha.
But
Interesting.
that was and the other one I want to share was the opening volley for the Stones Hackney Diamond tour.
Oh,
Wow, that was
They played a tiny club in New York.
I heard about that. Yeah.
Club's called Racket downtown, and they did half a dozen songs, and
Didn't a bunch of people come out of there with COVID too afterwards?
not that I mean, if they did, I certainly wasn't one of them.
Oh,
But
that's
what's
good.
amazing is usually, as you guys know, if it's an industry event, it's going to be packed, and you're gonna But it
sardines.
wasn't. It was full, but it was comfortable full, and it was really well done. And they did, they started 45 minutes late, but they did the highlights of the new album, and it was great. It was just, and it's like, wow, to see them that close up in that kind of environment. The Rolling
Yeah.
Stones, I mean, I'm spoiled. I mean, I've seen them so many times and I was on tour with them and, whatever, but this was so special.
So being
Steve,
a
let me
long
ask
time.
you.
Oh, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Steve, I want to ask you, obviously, with your experience on all sides, and I think Jim and I covered like favorite artists to work with and things like that.
Ah,
Rather than go into the artists that you may not have liked, which I think Jim and I spoke about some of those in previous podcasts, but some of those names we changed as well. But if you had to pick one that was like from the day you met them to the day you were, still dealing with the person or the group, who would be like tops for you?
there's, the guys from Genesis are great. Graham Nash is great. Pete Townsend, whenever he sees me, he knows my name. He says
Nice.
hello. I will tell you, getting a thank you from a musician or artist, I think is so unique. I think
Yeah.
you're aware of that. And I was involved in the early days in their American debut, Bow Wow Wow. And I think Annabella, when I saw her many years later, said, I don't think I appreciated and want to thank you. But the one that happened most recently, I went to in New Jersey, there's a place called the Garden State Art Center. Now it's called the PNC.
Yep.
And it was John Fogerty and George Thorogood. And John, I mean, I went backstage and John was like, Steve, thanks, everything you did, blah, blah, blah. But George insisted I come into his bus and he hugged me and he said, because I was one of the only promotion, there were two promotion people hired to work his second Rounder album. It's the first one didn't do a whole lot. And I will tell you that I had the unfortunate experience of losing my wife to COVID, and he was one of a handful of artists who actually called me up and expressed his condolences personally. only to find out many months later that he lost his wife also to another disease. But whenever he went on the road, I would get postcards from him on the road. Hey, Steve, greetings from Minneapolis. And, I mean, when I went in the bus, I brought my girlfriend with me, and he hugged me and he said, "You don't understand." And it was just,
And special.
some people are appreciative,
Yeah.
Some.
and others just could care less. Oh, you're not there? Okay.
Well, we just had Johnny Resnick of the Goo Goo Dolls on a couple of weeks ago. And through my conversations with him, he was extremely appreciative of what I did for him.
What you did for him, of course.
Yeah.
And the station you programmed, and you were very, very supportive of the Goos.
Yeah. And just a great guy. And that's one of the reasons he, agreed to come on, basically. Oh yeah, no, anytime. Let's make it happen. It's Two Guys on a Mic podcast. Please like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell on YouTube so that we can keep this thing growing. Steve Leeds is our guest today. Just going over some of the most recent comments because we said we would. Got one from a friend of yours, Mark, about the comments that I had made about Dan Ingram at 77 WABC and the reason I wanted to get into radio. Growing up listening to Dan, he had that extra special voice. And it was sad when they switched formats in '82. And then he talked about his guilty pleasure tracks and How Can I Breathe made his list. How Can I Fall from Breathe made his list. And the other one was Captain and Tennille, The Way I Want to Touch You. There's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, well, he had a few there, but I think
that was your friend Dave, by the way.
Dave German, who I worked with at Arista, who was significantly responsible for signing Taylor Swift and Expose, and he's a walking encyclopedia of music, and he should be one of our guests because he'd have great stories, and I think he's our #1 fan. He made it a point to say he was the first one to like us on our Facebook page. So He may be the one who's getting a car, Jim. He may be the guy.
Oh, yeah, Steve, if you haven't heard, Mark has promised a car when we get to 1,000 subscribers.
1,000? We said 1 million.
Oh, now it's 1 million?
Yeah, come on, you got to give me some time here, man.
Matchbox is making a limited edition car for us.
Exactly.
Kimosabi.
And a good one. That's a good one. Who was your favorite disc jockey growing up? Was it Murray the K?
Well, he was my mentor. It's hard. I had a very good relationship with a lot of the air staff at WNEW-FM, whether it was Scott Muni or Pete Fornatel or to this day Dennis Elsis,
Carol Miller.
Carol.
Amazing stuff.
I was trying to track down, a friend of ours is working on a documentary on the station, and I was trying to track down Allison's.
I think I know that person.
Daughter.
Tony Monty?
Yes.
A good friend of mine. I love him.
So I want to get Allison Steele's daughter, talk about her mother. Can't find her. She's somewhere in the Dakotas. But then I remember Allison had a sister, and they owned a cat boutique in New York City. So I look it up, do a little research, find her phone number on the internet. Her sister's Joyce. She lives out in Sag Harbor, Long Island. Call her up. I explained working on a documentary, and so what's your name? Steve Leeds. She goes, "Oh, I know you." I go, I never met her. How do you know me? Oh, Allison used to talk about you all the time.
Oh, wow.
Which totally flipped me out.
The Nightbird.
I mean, if you go on Facebook, those of you who grew up in New York or are radio fans, go on Facebook and just Google or search rather Allison Steele. Every day there's somebody saying something about her. She's bigger in death than in life, and she died when she was in her 50s, very young.
Wow.
So I can't tell you who. I mean, I talked to Jim Kerr. I mean, what a lovely man. I don't think I have any favorites. I mean, I did have a special place in my heart for Scott Muni, and it was very, very upset the way he was fired from the station. Got off the air on a Friday, and general manager pulls him in the office, says, "You just did your last show."
Nice.
That's typical.
Do that to somebody after 30 some odd years.
That's radio. It's the way, sadly.
I called up Jim, what's his name, Madison, at iHeart up in Boston at the time, and I said, "I need to talk to you." And he said, "Oh, what, you called me about a record?" I said, "No." I said, "I just want you to know W&W just fired Scott Muni, and it can't happen." And he said, "Okay." I said, "You got," and anyway, they found a place for him on Q104, the classic rock station. He did a lunchtime, I think a Beatles thing for years until he passed away. But I just thought, so disrespectful. And I know you say, Jim, that's how radio is. And I get that. I mean, you know, you're not working there anymore. You didn't get a chance to say goodbye to your audience.
No.
No.
I actually was on the air twice in my career when they walked in and handed me a CD because they were flipping the format. How many people could say that? Happened to me in Philadelphia and happened to me on Long Island. I was on the air at the time. Well, we're changing, going in a different direction.
Say goodbye.
And you were not able to say anything.
No, nothing. Nothing at all. It's rare that that happens, and that's why those moments are special, like when Scott Shannon leaves, you know, CBS FM, or he leaves PLJ, or even when he left Z100 to go to pirate radio, you know, but others, you know, it doesn't happen often where you get to do that.
I mean, the general manager's on Facebook, and I wanted to do something, and I said, it's not the right forum. But if I do run into him, I'm gonna say something that I'm gonna not feel good about afterwards, but it's gonna make me feel relieved that I was able to let him know what a crappy thing that was that he did.
Yeah.
And the way, not what he did, but the way he handled it. And I know what you're saying. It's just the way it is, but
It's business, not personal. Yeah.
Two guys and a mic. We're talking influential DJs in our lives. Steve Leeds is our guest, longtime record executive, co-worker with myself at Sirius XM for many years. He even worked at MTV, responsible for a lot over there. Mark, do you have a favorite disc jockey from when you were growing up?
No.
No?
How about that? I just listened for the music. I didn't have special.
Excuse me, you have Jim Ryan here. You better say something nice.
Yeah.
Jim Ryan was my all-time favorite DJ on Sirius Radio.
I mean,
but as a
come
kid,
on.
it was like 77 WABC and those kind of guys, and then NBC when that started to take off before Howard Stern and all that stuff. But I wasn't glued to the transistor under my ear like you radio DJs were.
Well, Dan Ingram.
Jim's going to have a radio job again soon. He's going to be picking songs.
He's my favorite. Come on.
Dan Ingram was my guy growing up.
Oh, yeah.
But
Dan Ingram, sure.
my mentor, actually, when I got into the business, I was doing nights out on East End of Long Island. And one night the request line rings. I mean, it was always ringing, but I pick it up and it is Jack the Whack from Z100. Who's on his way back from an appearance out in the Hamptons, back into the city. And he said he really enjoyed what he was hearing. And we became pretty fast friends on the phone. And he said, hey, if you're ever in Secaucus, come see me over at Z. And I was like there 2 days later. I took the day off from work and I went.
I'm on my way.
I became friends with him and Magic Matt, who was there at the time. That's how I met Kid Kelly for the first time ever. Many years later. Jack was such a great guy when he wanted to leave Z100 and go back south. He asked, I was doing mornings at the time up in Northwest New Jersey at WNNJ, and he wanted to come out and do some morning radio. So he came out and we did mornings for 2 weeks. And we were, at that point, I wasn't married. I didn't have a steady girlfriend. So I was ready to move anywhere. We were actually putting air checks together to go see if we could get a job doing mornings somewhere together. And then my father passed away, and he actually told my bosses that he would do mornings for 2 weeks to fill in for me, and they didn't even have to pay him except for gas money.
Wow.
So just a great guy, constantly gave me a lot of guidance with my air checks, and then Kid Kelly doing the same thing. So there you go. That's my favorite
long as-
DJ stories. And I was a big fan of WLIR too. Another great radio station on Long Island. A lot of great jocks.
I want to share a piece of rock and roll trivia with you, but I don't think it's gonna. Well, maybe you can see it.
Says jukebox, right?
But whose name is at the top?
That I
can't
can't
see
read.
I see jukebox. That's all.
Oh, Bob Buckman?
Yep.
Bob Buckman. Bob's a great dude. We were both worked with him at Sirius XM.
Yep. This was his. He ran a cafe, the Jukebox Cafe.
Okay.
When I first met him, he was a smart-ass kid right out of school, and he had Apple Radio. It was like I think it was like an internet radio station, and that was before he got the job at WBAV. But I do have to send him this card and just mess with him.
Bob is a great radio programmer and such a nice guy.
Very nice guy.
One of these days, Mark, we should have him on too, because he's got a
He's
lot of
gonna
great
have
stories.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah. No, you gotta, you should, yeah.
Plus, I just heard his Billy Joel thing on Sirius. He hosted
Yeah.
the whole thing, which was pretty awesome. And I think we're
Long Island boy.
yeah,
Yes, he
I think we
is.
went to the same school or something because I know his name's come up in some of our past crossings.
Well, he made WBAB on Long Island the powerhouse it was, and then
Well, forget that. Q104.
well, yeah, Q1. I was going to Q104 after that.
It's the number 2 12-plus station in New York City behind LTW. Nothing has changed since he left. Same air staff. I'm sure the library's been tweaked. He got hired out on the West Coast by KLOS. No fault of his. Cumulus came in and they sold it, and then he lost his job. And then he went down to San Diego and worked at AAA, and they promoted him, and then they fired him. And then
And then he landed at Sirius XM.
and I picked up the phone and said, "You need to call Steve Blatter." He said, "I don't know him." I said, "Get to know him."
Yeah. Yeah. Great guy.
Yes. So, Mark, all those plaques behind you, which one is your favorite?
I always tell everybody it's the Milli Vanilli one. That's one that's worth the most money, I think. I think that's a collector's item.
Oh no, I have the collector's item. I have a letter from Milli Vanilli thanking me for the Club MTV tour, and we know they didn't write the letter.
No, I wrote that. I also sang on the record, but that's for another podcast.
You mean the letter was lip synced as well, or yeah, ghost
So
writing?
one of my jobs was going on the Club MTV tour.
Okay.
I was there the night.
Oh,
And-
really?
Oh yeah. They were in it's Milwaukee. Yeah, I think it was Milwaukee. And their show is based on them climbing up. It opens with them with a pyramid, and they're
Right.
climbing the top of the pyramid, and they body slam. And they go back. Hey, Milwaukee, how you doing? And then the music starts. Milwaukee, and
Oh boy.
it wasn't plugged in. They throw the mics down and run off stage into the trailer. And Louis Messina, who is now the promoter for Taylor Swift, who's the guy that had the gumption to do a Club MTV tour, goes in the trailer. Downtown Julie Brown goes, the guy goes, no, we're too embarrassed. We can't do. No, finally convinced him to go out. They have to start it all over again.
Start the tape.
To start the tape.
Mark, how tough was that when all that came down? You were at Arista, right?
You were at Arista then?
Sure, that's why I got that plaque.
Who was the product manager at Arista?
Oh, we had a bunch of them. I'd have to go back and try to remember who they were, but
I called him up
I'm sure Dave
days
German will
before.
chime in and tell us.
days before, and I said, something's not right. I go, I think they're lip syncing. He goes, no. They
No,
say,
nothing about nothing.
No, I go, no, I'm telling you, there's something fishy. He goes, no, Steve, you're mistaken.
Who was it? Was it Tom Ennis? Maybe I have to
It
try
might
to
have
remember who
been.
that.
It might have been. But it was like he was so defensive about it. I go, I'm telling you, there's something wrong here. And then that happened, and that was the end of that.
Total
Exactly. I
damage
remember the
control.
conference call and stuff. I remember that whole thing, and then they all swamped the office, the press, and everybody. And I don't remember the exact press release, but it was like, I don't know, you don't know, I don't know, we don't know. But hey, they sold a lot of records. The songs were great. Some were written by Diane Warren. We were, running them up the chart, running them down the chart. And they sold a lot of records.
I would still get complaints when I was programming 80s on 8 at Sirius XM when they would play, and obviously we would play them because they had big hits. Some people would complain, why are you playing these fake blah, 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 you know, still
Hey, they were ahead of their
30
time.
years,
If you
40
listen
years
to what's
later.
on now, yeah,
People are still
If the
complaining.
audience only knew how much of the music we all played that was quote fake.
Right,
yeah.
right.
That's what I said. They were ahead of their time.
Two guys and a mic. Steve Leeds has been our special guest today. Steve, can't thank you enough for coming in.
Thank you,
Please
Steve.
like, subscribe. It is free and it helps us continue to.
And what did you say? The millionth like gets a free car?
I don't know. It changes every podcast. It depends.
Yeah.
We got to start to get our numbers up. I know
See
we
what
have
kind
a
of mood
Facebook
he's in.
page there. We're trying to work Instagram. I mean, this is with
Maybe
Jim Ryan's name.
maybe
It's
he'll
going to
give
be
you his
big.
Milli Vanilli plaque.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we can
I
give
have to
that
put that in
away.
my will. And actually, when I was at Arista, they did an AC sampler of the records I was working, and I think to this day, that's the only thing you can still find a version of their song on a CD because everything else was confiscated except for those private collectors. So I got a
Wow.
bunch of those I can sell.
What about the follow-up?
Their follow up to which one? Blame It on the Rain, or I mean, we had a bunch of them.
Didn't the studio people who actually did the vocals cut a record?
Oh yeah, I forgot they did something because I remember the producer who put them together in
Frankie
Germany.
Farian.
There you go, Frank
Frankie
Farian.
Farian.
I think he had a couple of other things, but I don't know
Yes,
if
he did. Listen, Clive was smart. He signed a lot of. That guy created a lot of hit songs.
yeah, I mean, Clive
smart
was
enough to
always
grab it.
connected to hits. I mean, whether he knew it or didn't know it, but I think in
Boney M.
Germany,
His
I
other
think in
big hit was
Germany it was
Boney M.
accepted.
That's
That's right.
Boney M.
Yep.
Daddy Cool.
Look at you.
He's got them all. He's got them all.
Frankie
Steve,
Farian.
thank you again for
Well,
spending
thank
time
you
with
for
us.
having me. I appreciate the opportunity. And if you like it, tell them.
Subscribe. Tell them.
Subscribe and you got to
Tell
ring the
us.
bell. We have to
Ring
build
that
this.
bell. Yes.
Otherwise, these guys are going to have to go back into radio, and you don't want that. So just
And comments. We love comments.
I got a lot of comments. I told you, I'm getting proposals.
you don't want
from,
this guy
from
calling
Taiwan.
people up and telling them what crappy records to play.
I still have to do
How
that.
much you like this show? Come on.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.